Okay, hi folks, we're back for round 3 of DM60. We're talking about web typography. All right, so in the previous segments we did some troubleshooting and we looked at how to install and use custom web fonts, which is actually a really nice thing to be able to do, as you will start using custom fonts, I'm sure, in all your websites if you haven't already. Now, exercise 10 is, quite frankly, it's a bit of a bear. It's a big exercise. It's going to take you several hours. It's a longer exercise than usual. There are a lot of pieces to it. So I went over in detail one of the main pieces, which is how to install custom fonts. But I ask you to do a lot more than that in this exercise. So I'm not going to be able to literally go through the entire exercise, but I am going to go through the pieces that are the most important. I'm not sharing my screen, am I? I'm going to share my screen. All right. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right. So there are a lot of pieces to this exercise. I've only done one little piece, but I'm going to show you the pieces that aren't really explained. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to reformat a chapter of Alice in Wonderland, make it into a web page which not only uses a custom font somewhere, but fulfills some other requirements. And some of those requirements are different font and text properties, some of which you've used before and some of which you haven't. And I want to talk about the difference between what's called a print style sheet and a screen style sheet, which relates to CSS media queries. So I'm going to ask you to download some text and illustrations. And I have 5 GIFs and a piece of text. The text comes from an open source, like a Project Gutenberg, I think I got it from some years ago. And the 5 GIFs are illustrations from the original John Tenniel illustrations of Alice in Wonderland, or Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. So there's the caterpillar smoking the hookah. There's the You Are Old Father William poem, which is what the rest of these GIFs are from. So the reason I chose this chapter from Alice in Wonderland, besides the fact that it's public domain, is that it has a lot of punctuation, and it's got a poem and pictures, and so there are a lot of opportunities to play with typographical principles. So go back here. So you can either click here and download each of these directly, or in the exercise down here, it says download the text and illustrations as a zip file, or you can directly, oh, that's supposed to be directly, sorry, my typo. That links back to that, but this will download everything as a zip file, so I'm just going to start with that. Downloaded a zip file, I hope. In my downloads folder, I should find it. x10files.zip, there it is. Open it up. And where'd it go? Did it unload it? Did it unzip it? Come on, there it is, okay. So I have those files now. The text file is a plain ASCII text file with a twist. Oh, you know what? I want to open this in brackets because it'll be a little bigger to see. Oh, it's opened here, sorry. So this is a plain text file, but if you look at it more closely, you'll see something slightly odd, and that is that the beginning and ending single quotes are a little different. Can you see that?
It's kind of small.
Yeah, let me just, can I make it bigger this way? Okay, how is that?
Much better.
You see that and you see that. You see that and you see that. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
This makes it easy to use a search and replace and use beginning and ending curly quotation marks. This is directly out of the format. I downloaded it from Project Gutenberg a few years back. And so it's sometimes when you download old texts that are public domain from things like Project Gutenberg or other sites, they will come like this to make it clear that you have beginning and ending single quotes, for example. Whereas instead of just using the primes on both, you have to go through a few more steps to do the curls. So I'm gonna ask you to pay particular attention to punctuation, and you're gonna have to convert a lot of things to proper punctuation, such as the quotation marks. Places where there's a double hyphen, you're going to replace that with a dash. But most of the work in the search and replace is going to be the quotation marks. There are a few places where there are double quotes. This is directly from the original text. There aren't that many double quotes in the original text from, who wrote, what's his name? Lewis Carroll, whose real name is Dodgson. And he was a bit of a perv with young girls, but he wrote Alice in Wonderland, and there's not a lot to this, but there's a lot of detail in terms of, here's a poem. This is a poem, and you can see that there are 4 lines in each one of the stanzas. So you have a lot of opportunities for some interesting formatting. In addition, you're going to weave the images in. So let me show you this isn't really an example of how I want you to do it. This is not even a particularly, where's the link? Here it is. No. Yeah, this is not even particularly a good example, but it gives you an example of how somebody else did it and where the images go with the poem. So this link here I have, and I don't know anything about this website. It looks a little weird to me, but what they do have is they have formatted the poem, not necessarily the way I would have done it or the way I'm asking you to do it, but I want you to see the placement of the images in the poem. So that the images do go with the poem. And then the beginning of the chapter has the caterpillar smoking the hookah, because this is the advice from the caterpillar, chapter 5 of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. So you can make the images bigger, smaller, flush left, flush right, floating in different ways. You can put the text next to each image. You can put the images between the text like this. Doesn't matter. I just want you to format it in any way that makes sense to you. And this is, again, not an example of how I want you to do it. This is not even a particularly good example of how this is formatted, but it does show you how one person did it and where the images go. So really the most important thing is where the images go. I want them to go in approximately the same place with the poem, because the images go with the poem. And I assume most of you have read Alice in Wonderland, but if you haven't, it's a really fun read. So that's the starting point, is the text, and your ending point is going to be a page that formats this text with the images. And it also says to use a custom font somewhere. So how you want to use your custom font or fonts is up to you. I just want somewhere in this whole thing the demonstration that you have installed and used a custom font. It could be just a headline, it could be the whole thing, whatever. I just want you to show that you know how to use and install a custom font, which is what we just went over before. But typographically speaking, I ask you to do a lot of things. And again, this is a long exercise, I'm sorry, but it is. Now, so you're going to download the text and images, and you're going to put them on a web page. It's going to be your exercise 10 page. So here are the CSS typographic properties that I want you to demonstrate the use of somewhere in the page. And again, as long as you demonstrate the use somewhere in the page, you don't have to go overboard. But the first letter and the first line pseudo class, and these font and text properties. So that's what I want you to demonstrate the use of. And these all link to example usage from the HTML help site. So If you're like font variant, I don't remember, what was font variant? Was it all caps and small caps? Was it italic? What's font variant? I don't remember. You click on that and it's like, oh, that's how you do small caps. Okay. And it gives you an example. Wow, that's really small. Can you guys see that? Okay, sorry. And so font variant is how you would do small caps. And it gives you example usage. So if you, just to jog your memory, oh, text align, how does that work? Okay, I can do left, right, or center, or justify. Oh, okay. What's this other property he wants me to use? Vertical align, line height, text indent. Okay, so line height is leading. That's the space between line. Line height is what we call leading in typography. And so I ask you to demonstrate the use of these CSS properties somewhere, and you'll find ways to use them. I want all the body text, including the poem, to be some sans serif type. Okay. The reason is that we're going to do a print style sheet where you're going to flip that around, and when it's printed, it's going to turn into serif type. So I want the screen version to use sans serif type. We'll get into how to do the print version in a minute. I also want you to pay attention to the punctuation that I'm asking you to use. I want you to show the use of a copyright sign, which is not in the text, so you're going to add that somewhere. You can say copyright Lewis Carroll. You could say copyright Joe Blow. I just want you to show the use of the copyright sign. I'm going to go through how you do that in a minute. I want you to show the use of M dash, specifically the places where there are double hyphens. You're going to convert those into an M dash. There's only 2 instances of that in this text. The thing that's a lot of stuff is the quotes. There are a lot of single quotes and there are a couple of pairs of double quotes, but I want you to have them curled properly, whether they're beginning or ending. And so that is actually a little tedious, but I'll show you some shortcuts on that. This commonly used special characters link is my tutorial on the code for special characters. So we've looked at this very briefly before. If you haven't looked at this before, oh, I hate this interface here. When I'm sharing my screen, I can't get to the bottom. Okay, so anyway, this shows you how some of these things look when you're using codes. For example, when you are doing a left single quote or a right single quote or a left double quote or a right double quote, there are codes or keyboard commands you can use. There are 2 ways to do special characters in HTML. One way is to use what's called a character entity, which is a piece of code that, for example, an open left single quote could be done in 2 ways. Ampersand pound 8216 semicolon. Wherever you put that, it will literally show an open curly single quote. Or when you type on a Mac, you can just say option close bracket. Or on Windows, you can type Alt 0145. I'm not kidding. I didn't make these codes up. I know they're a little arcane. But they're explained here. M dash, if you're on a Mac, you can type option shift hyphen, which is actually second nature to me. Or you could, in Windows, type Alt and then hold down the Alt key and type 0151. Or you could insert the code ampersand pound 8212 semicolon or ampersand M dash semicolon. Those are 2 different ways, well, 3 different ways really, because this way has 2 different possibilities of indicating special characters. I know that's a little weird, but that will get you used to the fact that to do things like curly quotes and M dashes and so forth, copyright signs, you need to know what these symbols are. The copyright sign you could either do as ampersand pound 169 semicolon or ampersand copy semicolon, or you could literally on the Mac type option G, which gives you a copyright sign in any Mac program, or on Windows Alt and then 0169. which gives you copyright signed in Windows. Fun, huh? I know this is kind of tedious. So anyway, that's your reference on how to do some of the special characters in the exercise. Oops, went too far. Stop me at any point where you have questions, or I'll just blather. Any questions so far? Okay. So then the other piece of that is how to do what's called a print style sheet. Now we've talked about CSS media queries. Specifically, last time we talked about CSS3 media queries. Older CSS media queries, like CSS level 2, not 3, you can do print style sheets. In other words, it's a media query, but it's just based on a simple fact of whether or not you have certain words in your link statement. So let me explain. It's not uncommon to have a style sheet for screen and a style sheet for print. And it's easier than it sounds because you're really just modifying the screen style sheet when you create the print style sheet. An example might be your screen or default style sheet has sans serif type. But when somebody prints the page in their printer, it then picks up different styles from your print style sheet and changes your sans serif font designation to a serif font. And the user doesn't do anything, they just send it to the printer, but the printer can print out something that looks fairly different than the screen version. And so we're going to show you how to do that. And along with that, you can also literally make text or content appear or disappear on the screen or print version. Why would you want to do something like that? Well, in the example I give here, for the print style sheet, you might want to add a statement that says, this is printed from my website. But on the screen style sheet, that might not be necessary. And so it's fairly easy to do something like that. So let's take a few minutes on how to deal with the print style sheet. Questions so far? Are you guys still awake? I know it's a long night. I know 3-hour classes till 9 o'clock at night is nobody's cup of tea. I understand if you're tired. I'm going to try to get through this as quickly as I can.
So quick question about the text. So I know you were highlighting some of the quotation marks, how they look a little different. Are you going to want us to change those into the quotation marks of the special characters?
Everything. Every one of these should be an open curly quote. That should be a closed curly quote. That should be a closed curly quote. That should be an open curly quote. That should be a closed curly quote. Single. See what I'm saying? There are 2 double pairs somewhere in here. I don't know why Lewis Carroll wrote it all like that, but you know, it's Old English. Somewhere in here, there are some double quotes, and I gotta find them.
So do you actually type that into the text and then it shows up that way?
Let's look at that. So I'm going to take this text. Let me just start with that one sentence. Who are you, said the caterpillar, right? I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go to my duh. Am I using that duh? Where's that duh file? I didn't throw that away, did I? Okay. So the answer is yes, that's one way you can do it. There are 2 ways you can do it. Okay, so let me just paste this just for fun. I'm just going to paste it here. So you see that text, right? Now, if I want to make this an open left curly quote, I can either literally put that code in there, I could literally do this. Copy, paste. That will appear as an open curly quote. Or, same difference, I could copy that instead and use that. There are 2 different systems. One uses numbers, one uses words. That would do the same exact thing. So those are equivalent. And they work in Mac and Windows, doesn't matter, they're not depend on that. But if I wanted to literally type the character on the Mac or Windows, I would do this. So in the Mac, an option close bracket would give me the same thing. So if I did an option close bracket, I'm holding on the option key while hitting close bracket. I get the curly quote I want. For this one, it's an Option Shift, close bracket, Option Shift, close bracket. You can do it that way instead of putting all those codes in. I find typing them directly easier. Some people
Thank you.
like copying and pasting codes. It doesn't matter.
Thank you.
Thank
Either
you.
will work. And that, yeah, so that's, this is what we call paying attention to typographic detail.
That's probably the first thing that I'm gonna probably do just to get that out of the way.
Yeah, now let me give you some okay, so let me, okay, since we're on this track, let me show you some shortcuts on that in terms of copy and, I'm sorry, search and replace. And then I want to get back to the print style sheet because that's the main thing I want to cover after this. So you could literally go through and manually do all that, and that's tedious, right? Or in your text editor, because, oh wait, I'm in the wrong document. In your text editor, let me put this in Text Wrangler for a minute because I'm more familiar with Text Wrangler's capabilities. I can do, let's see, can you, oh, this is Text Wrangler. This crashes if I try to make the text bigger. I haven't done search and replace in brackets. Let me try it. So in the brackets text editor instead of Text Wrangler, remember the Text Wrangler crashes when I try to make it bigger while I'm sharing my screen. It's some weird bug. I have no idea why. But so we'll go back to brackets. Where was that? Let's open this in brackets. Where's my brackets window? Hello. How come I'm not seeing it? Oh, did I push it down here? Yeah, okay. Sorry. So most text editors have some kind of search and replace. And of course, I'm not seeing the menu because of this bar. Let me get rid of this. Move that over there. I don't know if you see that or not. It's hard for me to know.
Yeah, we can see it. It says find after edit.
Okay, so now I can see this bar. So in brackets, I'm not sure where the search and replace function is. So it's probably under find, replace in file. So let's go to here. Find and replace with. Now, if I take this guy here and I copy it and I go back into my replace and I paste it and I replace with, and here, do you remember the keyboard command? Option close bracket. See that? I can't see if that curled it or not. I sure hope it did. And I say replace. And it, oh, I want to do a batch replace. Did it do it? It did not. Okay, well, that was a stunning failure. I know how to do this in several programs. I've never done it in brackets. By the way, you can actually do this in Microsoft Word the easiest. You know what?
I think there's a window at the bottom that shows them all, and now it's asking you to hit.
Oh,
a
replace. There we go.
button.
Thank you. Maybe that was what I was missing. Thank you. It does work. And there we go. So all my beginning ones now are correct, right? See that? I do the same thing with the ending. Copy that. Go back up to replace. Okay, so I like brackets. It's nice. Okay. Do replace. Replace in files probably does a batch in multiple files. And this time I am pasting that guy there. And I'm going to replace it with, do you remember what the keyboard command is for the close single quote? It is Shift Option close bracket. That's so intuitive. And I say batch and replace. And lo and behold, it did it. See? So this is not as tedious as you think. There are also a couple instances where there's double dashes. You want to replace those with Shift Option hyphen or whatever the Windows command is. I can't remember. It's Alt plus 0151. And all the other things it says to do. But basically, those quotes is the meat of it. And that's pretty fast to do if you do a batch search and replace in your text editor. There are only 2 instances that I remember of double quotes. This is one of them. Oh, here they are, right here. Unfortunately, the double quotes don't give you the same difference between the beginning and ending, so you'll have to do these manually to get the beginning and ending. And the beginning is, this is the double quote, so it's Option open bracket on the Mac, and it's Shift Option open bracket to close the double quotes. Isn't that weird? I mean, it's just, who made this shit up? I don't know. So again, that's not going to be that difficult. But it is, this is attention to typographic detail. Okay. So let me go back now. Is that good for the search and replace? You know what I'm asking you to do on all the characters? The
Yes.
correct answer is yes. What?
Yep,
No? It's okay if you don't get it. Let me know. I'll answer questions. But okay, so the one last thing I really want to make sure you know how to do is the print style sheet, because everything else I think you can figure out. We've covered it. So let's talk about those print style sheets again. Now, you've seen this before without maybe the media equals screen. So let's make this big so we can all see it. Can you all see that highlighted thing on my screen? Now,
Yes.
this is a standard link to a style sheet, but normally you don't see this media equals screen. That's not there, correct? The default is that media equals screen. So you don't have to put a media attribute into this link tag because if it's screen, because the default is that if you don't put a media attribute, media equals screen, media equals print, media equals handheld, media equals, I can't remember, there's a bunch of them that aren't that common, Braille, and so forth. If you don't put a media equals attribute, then the default is that it uses that style sheet for everything, all the different media, right? But you can specify that if you put media equals screen in this link statement, the browser will use that style sheet for screen. But if you just leave it at that, it won't matter. But what really makes this whole thing work is you add the second line, which is you link to another style sheet, which is your print styles, and you put media equals print. So there are two ways to do this. I know there's always two ways to do something in this business, right? One is you have two statements that look like this, which clearly say media equals screen and media equals print. And you have a style sheet that's your screen style sheet, and you have a style sheet that's your print style sheet, right? That should make sense, right? I'm asking right a lot because I can't see your faces. I can't really tell what you're thinking and how confused you are. Is there anybody that doesn't see that? Let me know, because I'll stop and get slower. But so what you're going to have is two different style sheets, and the main one is going to be your screen style sheet, right? Now, the other way to do it is to have two statements that look like this, which are the same as above, except we omitted the media equals screen from the first link. Okay. Now, what's the difference between the two systems? It's explained here. If you use this system, as it says, the browser will only use the print style sheet when printing, and it won't look at the screen style sheet when it's printing. But if you do it like this, and these are your two link statements, then the print style sheet will, in effect, include all the styles from the screen style sheet. In other words, if you have these two styles, they're independent of each other. So the browser will only apply the styles in your screen style sheet, say that 3 times fast, when it's being displayed on a screen, and it will only use these styles and these styles only when it prints the page. But if you use these two statements, everything will work as before in terms of the screen style sheet. The top one will be your default screen style sheet. The difference will be when you go to print it. And this second statement, by not adding media equals screen to the first statement, when it goes to print it, it will still use all the styles from the screen style sheet, and it will add to that with whatever's in your print style sheet. And if there's a conflict in styles in the print style sheet, it will overrule your screen style sheet. Let me say that again, because I might have lost you. If you use the top two statements, they're independent of each other, and the browser will only look at the one when it's displaying on the screen, and the browser will only look at the styles in the print style sheet when it's printing. It won't, they're independent of each other, and it won't mix and match the styles. But if you use these two statements, when you go to print it, the print style sheet will basically include all the styles from the screen style sheet, and then anything in the print style sheet that's in conflict with the screen style sheet, the print style sheet will overrule it. What's the practical difference of what I just said? The practical difference is it's more efficient to use the second system that's highlighted because you don't have to repeat stuff in the print style sheet. Because in a sense, the print style sheet will include everything from the screen style sheet and then add the print styles when it's printed. And if there's a conflict, it'll just use what's in the print style sheet. Anybody confused on that? Questions on that? That's a little weird.
So,
Second block is the best.
so we would still use the screen style sheet, but if it doesn't work in that, then it uses the print.
Well, let me explain further. Kind of. Let's say my screen style sheet had font family Arial for everything. Okay, that's this one. That's my screen style sheet. So this top style sheet, just called screen.css, that said all my fonts were going to be in Arial or sans serif type, right? And maybe it also had styles that it related to the background color, the size of images, different indentations, font sizes, different, it had all this stuff, right? Now, that's all in the screen style sheet as normal. But in the print style sheet, instead of repeating all that, so those styles would also be included when it's printed, I wouldn't have to repeat those styles again because it's going to pick those up. And so I would only have to add a few statements in the print style sheet, such as, oh, font family for everything is now serif, Times New Roman, instead of Arial and Helvetica, in which case it would use all the styles of the screen style sheet, even though they're not in the print style sheet. And in addition to the screen styles, it would then apply the print styles and overrule the screen styles where there's a conflict, specifically in the serif versus sans serif, so that you don't have to repeat all those styles as you would have to in the top two lines. Like if I do this, I would literally have to have the same stuff in both style sheets and then just some minor changes between the two. But if I use the bottom two, I don't have to repeat the styles in the screen style sheet when I make my print style sheet. My print style sheet would be very short. I would only specify what I want changed when it's printed.
Oh, okay. I get it now.
If that's confusing, look at it this way. In your print style, use the bottom system, use those two statements, do your screen style sheet as you normally would for your display, but in the print style sheet, you might only have a few lines, one of which would say, oh, I want everything to be in serif when it's printed. And all the other styles from the screen style sheet, rather, would be picked up when it's printed. And I'm going to show you a trick. Let me stop for a second. So does that make sense? Who's still kind of like,
Absolutely makes sense to me.
okay, let me give you an example that will save you a hassle. Your print style sheet. Let's take a look at a sample style sheet. Didn't we have a CSS open here somewhere? Yeah, we did. Okay, so here's a style sheet, right? Let's get rid of that for a second. Oh wait, actually no, I want this. Okay. Now, let's say that this is my screen style sheet. This is my exercise 10 screen.css, right? I've got a whole bunch of styles in here, right? So that font family is going to be used for H1s and paragraphs, right? Now let's flip it around. Now let's pretend that this is my print style sheet, okay? So I'm going to put a comment, a CSS comment. So we're clear. This is a print style sheet. Now, in my print style sheet, because John's directions say when it's printed, I want all the sans serif type to turn into serif, I could say something boring like this. Oops. So what does that statement do?
It
It says
overrides the sans serif with serif.
Yeah.
exactly. Oops, that capital T. So when I do that statement, all my H1s and all my paragraphs are now times, and they are not going to be that other weird font, which we're going to say for the sake of argument was a serif font, a sans serif font rather. Okay. So what I want is when you print it, I want the print to be serif. And when you don't print it and you show it on the screen, I want it to be a sans serif font. That's the effect we want to achieve. How do we do that? By adding a print style sheet and adding a rule that looks like that. However, that only selects H1s and Ps. If in your screen style sheet you've got H1s, Ps, H2s, H3s, H4s, maybe you have different styling for the poem and so forth. You've got lots of different designations, divs, spans could be selectors. You would have to indicate each one of those. H1, P, H2, etc. This gets old fast, right? Because if you don't, it won't overrule them all. Now, here's the shortcut, and this is probably the main and one of the only times you'll ever use what's called the universal selector. Do you remember the universal selector? Do you remember what it is? It selects
Nope.
everything. The universal selector is an asterisk. Oops, it's an Shift 8. Sorry, Shift 8. There we go. It's an asterisk. It's a Shift 8, right? It's a star. It's an asterisk. What does that mean as a selector? It means everything. Picture instead of that star, instead of that asterisk, H1, comma, H2, comma, H3, comma, H4, H5, H6, P, div, span, li, ul, every tag. So this line of code right here, you put that in your print style sheet, and everything will print in times. And you don't have to call out each specific instance of, oh no, H1s, H2s, H3s. That is one of the only times that I really have ever used the universal selector. So your print style sheet could basically be like that. And one other thing that we're going to talk about before we end. So there's your shortcut on fulfilling some of the exercise. The other thing we want to talk about is the display property. And I have covered this before some weeks ago, and you might have forgotten. Anybody remember the display property? Anybody?
No.
Kind of.
Well, I am going to pretend this is my print style sheet. Actually, let's go back to the exercise so I can show you where this is. Oh, maybe I didn't ask you to do it. I thought I did. Print style sheet. Oh, I thought oh yeah, here it is. Okay, step 19. And by the way, the print style sheet must also cause all the text to print in black. So what would we add to this? There you go. Now everything, paragraphs, headlines, blah, 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 are all going to be black. There's your shortcut. Okay, so the last thing I want to cover, and we're running out of time, so I want to do this fast, is how to use the display property to make something appear or disappear depending on whether you're viewing it on the screen or printing it. Example. Just a general example. Let's say that, have you ever printed a page out from teacherjohn.com? Have you noticed that when you print a page from my site, the validator buttons don't print? Because really, who needs validator buttons to print? Have you ever noticed that? Maybe you haven't printed pages from my site, but I have a rule that takes care of that. Likewise, when you do print it, instead of validator buttons, you get a statement that says, this is printed from teacherjohn.com. But you don't see that when you look at it on screen because you're not printing it. How did I do that? How will you do that? You will do it with the display property. So in your HTML, Where is that duh file? In your HTML. In your HTML. If you have something that looks like, let's say, this was printed from teacherjohn.com. Okay, so let's say I have this statement, and I only want that to appear when the page is printed. I do not want it to appear when it's viewed on the screen. So what I would do is I would, maybe I'll put it in a paragraph. Oh, I see what brackets does. Great. Oh, it doesn't let me drag it. Okay. Okay. I'm going to give this a class. I'll call it printed. I only want that paragraph to show up when it's printed. I do not want it to show up when the page is viewed on the screen. Likewise, what it asks you to do is, oh, it's all I ask you to do. Oh, that's, oh, not have the validators show up when it's printed. All right. So here's my validator buttons. Oh, they're conveniently located in a div, aren't they? I'll call it screen view, whatever. So I've given this a class of screen view, and I've given this, actually we'll put this at the bottom of the page too, because it makes sense. I've given that a class of printed. I'll call it print view, just for fun, print view. So what I'm saying is, I want the validator buttons not to show up when it's printed. I want this sentence not to show up on the screen. You understand that so far? That's what I want to have happen. I put both things in my HTML. I give them different classes. Now I can turn one on or off in the style sheets with the display property by saying whether or not to display it. So in my print style sheet, I want that to show up, but not the validator buttons. So let's, oh, you know what? This is not supposed to be in that div, sorry. X, it should be there. My mistake. There we go, cleaner. Sorry, the div is separate from the paragraph. There we go. So I want the paragraph to show up when it's printed, but not viewed on the screen. I want the div for the validator buttons to show up when it's on screen, and I don't want the validator buttons to print. So by giving two different classes, I can refer to those classes in my style sheet. So in my screen style sheet, I don't want this thing that says it was printed. So in my screen style sheet, I would say something like this. The class for this, what was it called? The print view. Display none. This is my print style sheet. So what I'm saying in my print style sheet is anything with the class of print view. Oh, I'm sorry. This is my print style sheet, not my screen style sheet. Display block, my fault. So there's block and none. Block means displayed as a block level element, which is what you're going to use. Basically any, except for a span or something, pretty much everything is block level. So you really, unless you're trying to display something that is a inline level element, which you say inline instead of block, you're going to make it say display block. So that's pretty much the standard. In other words, what that says is when I'm printing it, display this as a block level element. In other words, just display it because it is a block level element. But in my screen style sheet, I would have a different rule. I would say screen view, display block. Now let me go back and let me do this in a more logical manner because I realize that I might confuse you. So here we go. This is the print style sheet. So let's do both. This will make it more clear to you. There we go. So this is my print style sheet. I'm saying in my print style sheet, display something with this class of print view. Do not display the validator buttons. So my print style sheet would look something like that. My screen style sheet, we're not going to have that. My screen style sheet is going to say the opposite. Print view, display none. Screen view, display block. So essentially, I put both things in my HTML, but in my style sheet, I say display one or the other, depending on whether it's printed in the print style sheet, whether it's in the print style sheet or the screen style sheet. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing. Yes?
Got it.
Mhm.
Good.
And the display property is super handy. It's used in a lot of ways like this. It's used to make things disappear or appear, whether you say display block or display none. Super handy. It's also used in this same exact way when you're doing CSS3 media query breakpoints. If you want some things to appear at a small size but not a large size or vice versa, you do it the same way. And you would put these different statements in your different media query breakpoint sections. Typically, you could make the large menu disappear and make a smaller one appear in its place for the phone. It's the same technique. It's using the display property to make something disappear or appear. It's kind of cool. So I'm sorry it's 9:06, we went a minute over. I've covered a lot tonight. I threw a lot at you. This is not a short exercise. That's why it's the last exercise. I wanted to kind of get into the final project, but we're not going to do that till next week. This is your last exercise. I'm going to have a few more extra credit exercises that I'm going to add to the page so that you can do some more things. Next week, we're going to cover grid layouts and go over more of this stuff because you'll have a lot of questions next week, I am sure, and talk about the final project. So this was a pretty meaty class. I threw a lot at you, but it's a lot of good stuff. The basics of typography, as well as how to install fonts and format stuff. So this is kind of play with it. Try to format your Alice in Wonderland page any way you want, but just demonstrate the use of the properties. Final questions?
I have a question, John. It's not related to this class. Maybe after you're done recording.
Okay. Any questions related to the material we covered?
So for the for when you're having this print view and the screen view, you just flip them depending on what CSS folder or file they're going into, right?
Exactly. So for example, this would be something I would see in my screen styles. And so there's my screen styles on the top. And my print styles, these would be in separate documents, right? My print styles would be the opposite. So these would be two separate documents. There's my print. This would be my print style sheet would have these things in it that says display anything with a class of print view when it's printed. Don't display anything with a class of screen view. My screen style sheet would say don't display anything with a class of print view, but do display anything with a class of screen view. But so you would have these rules that look similar to these in your screen and your print style sheet. Yeah?
Yeah, okay.
And there's examples of how to do it, and you can even use those class names if you want, print view, screen view, and you just apply those classes. Oh wait, where is it? What did I do with that other page I had? Here it is. Yeah. So there's an example of how you would do that and how you would do that. So I've actually given you the code right there, basically. There's your examples. It's all right there in this video.
Right. Thank you, John.
Okay, and it's kind of fun. Now, by the way, to test the what it looks like in print, you don't have to send it to a printer and actually print the page out. You can do a print preview from your browser and look at it and see that way. You don't have to print them out to test it. Just do a print preview and you'll see the difference when you go to print something. Okay, thanks folks. I'm gonna stop recording. Where's my recording? Oh, I'm sharing my screen. Let's stop sharing the screen. I said stop sharing, didn't I? Okay.